The small-town diner was alive with the usual hum of activity on that crisp autumn morning. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting warm golden beams across the worn wooden floors. The air smelled of freshly brewed coffee, buttery pancakes, and sizzling bacon, a comforting aroma that made everyone feel at home. Locals filled the booths and stools, chatting about their plans for the day or catching up on neighborhood gossip. It was just another ordinary morning, or so it seemed. In a quiet corner near the back, Marcus Johnson sat alone at a table. He was a tall man with broad shoulders, though his frame now leaned heavily into the arms of a wheelchair. His dark skin bore faint scars from years spent under the harsh sun of distant lands, and his eyes carried a depth that hinted at stories untold. Today, however, he wasn't thinking about those stories. Instead, he focused on the simple joy of enjoying a hot meal away from the cramped apartment where he spent most of his days. Marcus had served 2 tours overseas as an Army soldier before an IED explosion changed everything. The blast took not only his ability to walk, but also pieces of his confidence and independence. Still, he wore his old military jacket proudly, its patches faded yet full of meaning. Each one represented battles fought, friendships forged, and sacrifices made. For Marcus, this visit to the diner was more than just breakfast. It was a rare moment of normalcy in a life that often felt anything but normal. As he carefully cut into his scrambled eggs, unaware of the whispers beginning to ripple around him, Marcus couldn't help but notice how different things felt compared to when he first returned home. At first, people clapped for him, called him a hero, and thanked him for his service. But over time, those cheers faded, replaced by indifference, or worse, judgment. Some folks whispered behind his back, questioning whether he truly deserved the benefits he received. Others avoided eye contact altogether, treating him like a ghost haunting the edges of their lives. At the counter, a group of young men laughed loudly, drawing attention from nearby tables. Their leader, a burly guy named Jason, leaned toward his friends, his voice carrying just enough for others to hear. "Look at that guy," he said, nodding toward Marcus. "Sits there acting all pitiful. Probably hasn't done a damn thing worth respecting." His words dripped with disdain, laced with both racism and resentment. A few heads turned uncomfortably while others pretended not to notice. Jason's smirk grew wider as he continued. "Bet he thinks he deserves special treatment just 'cause he wore a uniform once." His buddies chuckled nervously, egging him on. Encouraged by their laughter, Jason slid off his stool and began walking toward Marcus's table. The tension in the room thickened, though no one dared say a word. All eyes followed him, curious and fearful of what might happen next. For Marcus, the world seemed to slow down. He could feel the weight of stairs pressing against him, hear the faint echo of footsteps approaching. Yet he tried to stay calm, gripping his fork tightly as if it were some sort of anchor keeping him grounded. Little did he know, this quiet morning was about to take a turn, one that would change not only his day but also the lives of everyone in that little diner. Jason's heavy boots thudded against the diner floor as he approached Marcus's table, his smirk widening with each step. The noise seemed to echo in the suddenly quiet room, drawing even more attention to the scene unfolding. Marcus kept his eyes fixed on his plate, pretending not to notice the looming figure. He hoped that if he stayed still and silent, Jason might lose interest and leave him alone. But deep down, Marcus knew better. Trouble had a way of finding him these days, no matter how hard he tried to avoid it. "Hey, you," Jason said loudly, his voice cutting through the tense atmosphere like a knife. When Marcus didn't look up immediately, Jason leaned down, planting both hands firmly on the edge of the table. "I'm talking to you," he growled, his breath carrying the faint scent of cheap cologne mixed with arrogance. Reluctantly, Marcus raised his head, meeting Jason's cold gaze. For a moment, their eyes locked. Marcus's filled with quiet dignity, while Jason's burned with hostility. "What do you want?" Marcus finally asked, his tone calm but edged with weariness. He wasn't in the mood for confrontation, especially not here, in a place where he'd come seeking peace. But Jason wasn't interested in answers. He wanted an audience. And now, with every patron in the diner watching silently, he had one. "You think you can just sit here acting all high and mighty?" Jason sneered, standing upright again to tower over Marcus. "People like you make me sick, sitting around expecting handouts because you wore a uniform once." His words dripped with mockery, each syllable designed to cut deeper than the last. Marcus clenched his jaw, trying to ignore the sting of Jason's insults. He'd heard them before, in whispers at the grocery store, in sideways glances from strangers, even in anonymous comments online, but hearing them shouted out loud in such a public setting felt different. It was humiliating, degrading, and impossible to escape. Still, Marcus refused to give Jason the satisfaction of seeing him react. Instead, he focused on steadying his trembling hands, gripping the edge of the table beneath them. But Jason wasn't done. Emboldened by the lack of resistance, he took things further. With a swift motion, he reached out and swiped Marcus's plate off the table. Scrambled eggs, toast crumbs, and shards of ceramic scattered across the floor, leaving a mess that mirrored the chaos now brewing in the diner. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by murmurs of disapproval, but no one stepped forward to intervene. Fear held them back, uncertainty rooting them to their seats. Marcus froze, staring at the wreckage below. His breakfast lay ruined, but it wasn't the food he mourned. It was the loss of dignity, the feeling of being stripped bare in front of everyone. For a brief second, anger flared inside him, hot and sharp. How dare this man treat him this way? Who gave him the right to judge someone he didn't even know? But Marcus pushed the anger down, burying it beneath layers of self-control. Reacting would only make things worse, he told himself. Better to stay quiet and let the storm pass. As Marcus awkwardly bent forward in his wheelchair, attempting to pick up a fallen napkin, the tension in the room reached its peak. The other customers exchanged uneasy glances, torn between sympathy for Marcus and fear of Jason's aggression. Some looked away, unable to bear the sight of the humiliation unfolding before them. Others whispered nervously among themselves, debating whether they should say or do something. Yet no one moved. Not yet. And then, just as the silence grew unbearable, the diner door swung open with a soft creak. A gust of cool autumn air swept in, carrying with it the promise of change. No one paid much attention at first. All eyes were still glued to Jason and Marcus. But soon, footsteps echoed through the space, steady, deliberate, and commanding. Whoever had entered wasn't here for coffee or pancakes. They were here for something else entirely, something that would alter the course of this morning forever. The sound of boots clicking against the tiled floor was sharp and deliberate, slicing through the tense silence like a blade. Every head in the diner turned instinctively toward the door, curiosity pulling their attention away from the unfolding drama between Marcus and Jason. Standing there, framed by the soft glow of morning sunlight streaming through the glass, was a woman who radiated authority and purpose. She stood tall, her posture impeccable, with an air of confidence that demanded respect without saying a word. Colonel Evelyn Hayes scanned the room quickly, her sharp eyes taking in the scene before her, the scattered remnants of Marcus's breakfast on the floor, the sneer frozen on Jason's face, and Marcus himself, bent awkwardly in his wheelchair as he tried to clean up the mess. Her expression shifted almost imperceptibly from calm observation to quiet determination. Without hesitation, she began, walking toward them, her movements precise and unhurried, each step echoing like a heartbeat in the suddenly still diner. Jason noticed her approach first. His smirk faltered slightly as he straightened up, unsure what to make of this unexpected interruption. "What do you want?" he snapped, his tone laced with irritation but tinged with unease. Evelyn didn't respond immediately. Instead, she stopped just a few feet away, planting herself firmly between Marcus and Jason. Her presence alone seemed to create an invisible barrier, forcing Jason to take a step back, not out of fear, exactly, but out of sheer instinct. Evelyn finally spoke, her voice steady and clear, carrying just enough weight to command attention. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, glancing briefly at Jason before turning her gaze to Marcus. Her tone was neutral, almost casual, but there was no mistaking the underlying steel behind her words. It was the kind of voice that could cut through chaos or calm a battlefield, depending on which was needed. For a moment, no one said anything. The other patrons held their breath, waiting to see how Jason would respond. He blinked, caught off guard by both her demeanor and her sudden appearance. Then, recovering his bravado, he crossed his arms over his chest and leaned forward slightly, attempting to assert dominance. "This doesn't concern you," he said dismissively, though his earlier swagger had dimmed noticeably. Evelyn raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. Without breaking eye contact, she reached into the breast pocket of her perfectly pressed uniform and pulled out her military ID badge. Holding it up so everyone in the diner could see, she let the significance of the moment sink in. The golden insignia gleamed under the light, marking her rank and years of service. "Actually," she replied coolly, "it does concern me." Her next words were directed not just at Jason, but at everyone listening. "I'm Colonel Evelyn Hayes, United States Marine Corps, and I've spent decades serving alongside people like him." She gestured subtly toward Marcus, who looked up at her with wide, surprised eyes. "People who have sacrificed more for this country than most will ever understand." Her voice softened slightly as she added, "So, yes, Mr." She paused pointedly, daring Jason to give his name. "Whatever your issue is, it concerns me." The effect was immediate. Whispers rippled through the crowd, some patrons nodding approvingly while others exchanged nervous glances. Even Jason's friends, who had been standing nearby egging him on, began shifting uncomfortably. For the first time since entering the diner, Jason found himself on the defensive. His jaw tightened and his fingers drummed anxiously against his arm as he searched for a retort. But Evelyn wasn't finished. She took a single step closer, closing the distance between them until she was nearly toe-to-toe with Jason. Her voice dropped lower, quieter, but infinitely more threatening. "If you have a problem with him," she said, her piercing gaze locking onto his, "then you have a problem with me. And trust me when I say, son, you don't want that." The room fell utterly silent. Not even the clink of silverware or the hum of the coffee machine could be heard. All eyes were fixed on Evelyn and Jason, the tension thick enough to slice with a knife. Whatever bravado Jason had left evaporated under her unwavering stare. For the first time, doubt flickered across his face, and it was clear that the tide was beginning to turn. Jason hesitated, his usual bravado crumbling under Evelyn's piercing gaze. For a moment he looked like a child caught misbehaving, unsure whether to double down on his aggression or retreat entirely. But pride, or perhaps sheer stubbornness, won out. Squaring his shoulders, he tried to regain control of the situation. "Look, lady," he said, forcing a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You don't know what you're talking about. This guy probably didn't do anything worth respecting anyway." His words hung in the air, heavy and hollow. The diner remained silent except for the faint ticking of the wall clock, each second stretching longer than the last. Evelyn didn't flinch. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, studying Jason with an expression that was equal parts disappointment and disbelief. "Is that so?" she asked calmly, her voice carrying just enough skepticism to make him bristle. Without waiting for a response, Evelyn turned her attention to Marcus. She crouched down slightly, lowering herself to his eye level, an act of respect that seemed almost foreign in this tense atmosphere. Her tone softened but retained its strength as she addressed him directly. "Sir," she began, her voice warm yet firm. "May I ask how long you served?" Marcus blinked, caught off guard by the unexpected question. For a moment he looked uncertain, as though wondering if this was some kind of trick. But then, seeing the sincerity in Evelyn's eyes, he straightened up a little in his wheelchair. 14 years, he replied quietly, his voice steady despite the weight of the room pressing down on him. 2 tours overseas. Evelyn nodded slowly, her lips forming a thin line. Then, without missing a beat, she stood back up and turned to face Jason once more. 14 years, she repeated, enunciating each word clearly for everyone to hear. That's more service than most people can even imagine, more sacrifice than anyone should ever have to endure. She paused, letting the gravity of her statement settle over the room before continuing. And let me tell you something else. When someone signs up to defend this country, they don't get to pick where they go or what happens to them. They step forward because they believe in something bigger than themselves, something you clearly wouldn't understand. Her words hit their mark, slicing through Jason's defenses like a blade. He shifted uncomfortably, his earlier confidence faltering under the weight of her conviction. But Evelyn wasn't done. Stepping closer still, she leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to a near whisper, but loud enough for those around them to catch every syllable. If you think being brave means picking fights with men half your size, then you've got a lot to learn about real courage. The murmurs among the crowd grew louder, some patrons nodding in agreement while others exchanged nervous glances. Even Jason's friends seemed less eager to support him now, exchanging uneasy looks as the spotlight intensified. One of them muttered something under his breath, tugging at Jason's sleeve as if urging him to walk away. But Jason, unwilling to back down completely, shot back one last jab. Yeah? Well, maybe he should have thought about consequences before signing up. It was the wrong thing to say. Evelyn's eyes narrowed, her patience finally wearing thin. Consequences, she echoed, her voice rising just enough to command absolute silence. You want to talk about consequences? Let me paint you a picture. Consequences mean coming home missing limbs, or not coming home at all. It means living with scars no one can see, struggling to find work, or dealing with people like you who think it's okay to mock their sacrifices. She gestured toward Marcus, her hand steady and unwavering. This man has paid a price you couldn't begin to comprehend, and instead of showing gratitude, you choose to insult him? Shame on you. The room erupted into murmurs again, but this time they were different. Anger simmered beneath the surface, directed not at Marcus but at Jason. An elderly woman, seated nearby, stood abruptly, pointing a finger at him. You ought to be ashamed of yourself, she exclaimed, her voice trembling with emotion. Others quickly joined in, voicing their disapproval until the tide of public opinion had fully turned against him. Jason glanced around nervously, realizing too late that he was outnumbered and outmatched. His bravado cracked further, replaced by a flicker of genuine unease. For the first time since entering the diner, Evelyn allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. She had made her point, and the message was clear. Bullying wouldn't be tolerated. Not today, not here, and certainly not by her. The atmosphere in the diner had shifted dramatically. What started as a tense confrontation between Jason and Marcus had transformed into something else entirely, a collective stand against cruelty. Evelyn's words hung in the air like thunderclouds, heavy and unignorable, while the murmurs of disapproval from the crowd grew louder, more emboldened. Jason, once the ringleader of his group, now looked cornered, his earlier confidence crumbling under the weight of public judgment. You need to apologize, Evelyn said firmly, her voice cutting through the growing chatter like a knife. She stood tall, her arms crossed over her chest, exuding an aura of authority that left no room for argument. Her piercing gaze locked onto Jason's, daring him to defy her. The message was clear. This wasn't just about making amends. It was about accountability. Jason glanced around nervously, searching for support from his friends, but they avoided his eyes, shifting uncomfortably or staring at their shoes. One of them muttered something under his breath. "Just say sorry." But it came out as barely more than a whisper. Even the waitress behind the counter folded her arms and raised an eyebrow, silently urging him to do the right thing. For the first time, Jason realized he was alone in this fight. Reluctantly, he turned back to Marcus, who sat quietly in his wheelchair, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of surprise and relief. Jason opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. He swallowed hard, his face flushing red with embarrassment, or perhaps shame. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he mumbled, "Sorry, I guess." It wasn't much, and it certainly wasn't heartfelt, but Evelyn didn't let it slide. "Try again," she said sharply, her tone leaving no room for half-hearted attempts. And this time, mean it. Jason clenched his jaw, clearly frustrated but unwilling to push his luck further. Taking a deep breath, he forced himself to look at Marcus directly. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice louder this time, but still lacking sincerity. "For, messing with your stuff." It was clumsy and awkward, but it was enough, for now. Evelyn nodded once, satisfied that the apology, however reluctant, had been delivered. She stepped aside slightly, breaking the barrier she'd created between Jason and Marcus, signaling that the confrontation was over. Without another word, Jason turned on his heel and stalked toward the exit, his friends trailing behind him, like shadows. The door swung shut behind them with a soft click, leaving the diner eerily quiet in their absence. For a moment, no one spoke. The tension lingered, though it was lighter now, replaced by a sense of cautious relief. Then, someone began to clap. It was the elderly woman who had earlier scolded Jason, her hands moving slowly at first, then picking up speed as others joined in. Soon, the entire diner erupted into applause, the sound filling the space with a warmth that chased away the remnants of hostility. Evelyn smiled faintly, nodding in acknowledgement, but her focus quickly returned to Marcus. She knelt beside him once more, meeting his gaze with genuine concern. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, her voice gentle now, free of the sharpness she'd used with Jason. Marcus nodded, though his hands still trembled slightly as he adjusted his grip on the armrests of his wheelchair. "Yeah," he replied, his voice thick, with emotion. "Thanks to you." Evelyn shook her head dismissively, brushing off the gratitude. "No thanks needed," she said firmly. "What happened here today wasn't right, and anyone with a shred twist." Evelyn's words hung in the air, simple yet powerful. What happened here today wasn't right, and anyone with a shred of decency would have done the same. She gave Marcus a reassuring smile before standing up straight and turning her attention to the waitress, who had been watching everything unfold with wide eyes. "Can we get him a fresh plate?" Evelyn asked, her tone polite but firm. "And I'll cover it." The waitress nodded quickly, already heading toward the kitchen. "Of course," she said, her voice warm with gratitude. "And thank you for everything." Evelyn simply smiled in response, brushing off the praise as if it were nothing more than expected. As they waited for the new meal, Evelyn pulled out the chair across from Marcus and sat down, her posture relaxed but attentive. "I'm Colonel Evelyn Hayes," she introduced herself, extending a hand. Marcus hesitated for only a moment before reaching out to shake it. His grip was firm despite the tremor in his fingers. "Marcus Johnson," he replied softly. "And I can't thank you enough." Evelyn waved a hand dismissively, leaning back slightly in her chair. "Don't mention it," she said with a small chuckle. "Besides, it's not every day I get to remind people what respect looks like." Her comment drew a faint smile from Marcus, the first genuine one he'd shown all morning. Encouraged, Evelyn continued, her tone lightening. So, tell me about yourself, Marcus. 14 years is a long time to serve. Where did they send you?" Marcus hesitated, clearly unaccustomed to sharing his story so openly. But there was something about Evelyn, her calm demeanor, her steady gaze, that put him at ease. Slowly, he began talking. He spoke about his deployments, the camaraderie of his unit, and the challenges of adjusting to civilian life after his injury. He talked about the physical pain that never fully went away and the emotional scars that ran even deeper. And he admitted, almost reluctantly, how isolating it felt when people treated him like a burden instead of a veteran. Evelyn listened intently, nodding occasionally and asking thoughtful questions. When Marcus mentioned struggling to afford medical bills or make ends meet, her expression softened with empathy. "That's unacceptable," she said firmly. "Men and women like you shouldn't have to fight these battles alone. There are resources out there. You just need someone to help, point you in the right direction." Before Marcus could respond, the waitress returned with a steaming plate of scrambled eggs, toast, and bacon, the aroma filling the space between them. "Here you go," she said brightly, setting it down in front of Marcus. "On the house, sir." Evelyn raised an eyebrow, clearly about to protest paying, but the waitress held up a hand. "No arguments, Colonel. Consider it our way of saying sorry this even happened in the first place." Marcus looked touched, his eyes glistening slightly as he murmured his thanks. Evelyn grinned, leaning forward again. "See? People aren't all bad," she said lightly, nudging him with a playful wink. "Some of us still know how to do the right thing." As Marcus began eating, the mood shifted further, becoming lighter and less weighed down by the earlier confrontation. Evelyn shared a few stories of her own military experiences. Not the glamorous ones, but the relatable moments that made Marcus laugh quietly. They bonded over their shared understanding of sacrifice and duty, two things most civilians struggled to comprehend. By the time Evelyn finally stood to leave, promising to check in on Marcus soon, the diner felt different. The other patrons greeted her warmly as she passed, some thanking her outright while others simply offered knowing nods. One man even slipped her a business card, insisting she call if she ever needed anything. Evelyn accepted it graciously, tucking it into her pocket with a smile. Before stepping out into the crisp autumn air, she turned back to Marcus one last time. "Take care of yourself, okay?" she said, her voice warm but firm. "And don't hesitate to reach out if you need help. You're not alone in this." With that, she gave a final salute, a gesture both respectful and deeply personal, and walked out the door. The diner buzzed with quiet conversation afterward, the earlier tension replaced by a sense of solidarity. For Marcus, it wasn't just a meal or an apology. It was a reminder that kindness still existed in the world. And for everyone else, it was proof that standing up for what's right could spark change, one act of courage at a time. News of what happened at the diner spread faster than anyone expected. By late afternoon, word had traveled through the small town like wildfire, thanks in part to a few patrons who couldn't resist sharing the story with friends and neighbors. Someone even posted about it on social media, describing how a Marine colonel stood up for a disabled veteran against a group of bullies. The post went viral within hours, sparking outrage, admiration, and calls for action. Local news outlets picked up the story, sending reporters to interview witnesses and piece together the events of that morning. The diner became an unlikely hotspot, with curious residents stopping by just to see where it all unfolded. Some came bearing questions, others brought support. Marcus's name was mentioned often in these conversations, though not always with his permission. For him, the sudden attention was overwhelming. He wasn't used to being in the spotlight, and certainly not for something so personal. Evelyn, too, found herself thrust into the limelight. People recognized her around town, approaching her with words of gratitude or simply to shake her hand. "You did the right thing," one elderly man told her as she walked out of a grocery store. Another woman hugged her tightly, tears streaming down her face. "My son is a veteran," she said. "Thank you for standing up for them." Despite the praise, Evelyn remained humble. In interviews, she deflected credit back to Marcus and other veterans, emphasizing their sacrifices over her actions. "I didn't do anything special," she insisted repeatedly. "I just did what any decent human being should have done." Still, her courage resonated deeply with people, inspiring many to reflect on how they could better support veterans in their own communities. The community rallied around Marcus in ways he never anticipated. A local veterans organization organized a fundraiser to help cover his medical expenses, raising thousands of dollars in just a few days. Strangers dropped off gift cards, groceries, and handwritten notes of encouragement at his apartment. One contractor offered to install a wheelchair ramp at his building free of charge, while another donated furniture to make his living space more accessible. It was as if the entire town had come together to say, "We're sorry this happened, and we're here for you now." Even the diner owner joined in, announcing that Marcus would eat for free any time he visited. "This place owes you," the owner said when Marcus returned a week later, touched but unsure how to respond. "Consider it our way of making things right." Other customers greeted him warmly, some introducing themselves and thanking him for his service. For the first time in years, Marcus felt seen, not as a burden or an outsider, but as someone valued and respected. Meanwhile, Evelyn's role in the incident sparked broader discussions about supporting veterans and combating prejudice. She was invited to speak at a local town hall meeting, where she urged residents to look beyond stereotypes and recognize the humanity in everyone. "Veterans aren't looking for pity," she said passionately. "They're looking for understanding, for a chance to reintegrate into society without judgment or barriers. We can all play a part in creating that opportunity." Her words struck a chord, prompting several initiatives aimed at improving resources for veterans in the area. A job fair specifically for former service members was organized, connecting them with employers willing to accommodate their needs. Counseling services expanded their outreach programs, offering free mental health support to those struggling with PTSD or isolation. Even schools got involved, hosting assemblies to teach students about the importance of respecting veterans and standing up against bullying. Through it all, Evelyn stayed connected with Marcus, checking in regularly to ensure he was adjusting well to the newfound support. Their bond grew stronger with each conversation, built on mutual respect and shared experiences. Inspired by Evelyn's example, Marcus decided to pay it forward. He began volunteering at a nearby veterans center, mentoring younger vets navigating the challenges of civilian life. "If someone hadn't stood up for me," he told them during one session, "I might still be sitting in that diner feeling invisible." Don't let anyone tell you your service doesn't matter. As weeks turned into months, the ripple effects of that single morning continued to grow. What started as an act of defiance against cruelty had blossomed into a movement of compassion and unity. The diner, once just a quiet corner of the town, became a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in moments of darkness, kindness could shine through. And for Marcus and Evelyn, it marked the beginning of a new chapter, one defined not by pain or prejudice but by purpose and possibility. Weeks had passed since the incident at the diner, but its impact lingered like the warm glow of sunrise on a cold morning. The small town buzzed with newfound energy, as if awakened to the power of collective kindness and courage. Marcus noticed subtle changes everywhere he went. Strangers smiled more warmly, shopkeepers greeted him by name, and people held doors open for him without hesitation. It was as though the entire community had taken Evelyn's actions as a call to do better, to be better. One crisp autumn afternoon, Marcus attended a ceremony in the town square honoring local veterans. Flags fluttered gently in the breeze, their colors vibrant against the clear blue sky. Rows of folding chairs were filled with families, friends, and residents eager to show their support. When Marcus arrived, he was surprised to see Evelyn waiting for him near the stage. She stood tall in her uniform, her presence commanding yet comforting. "Glad you made it," she said with a smile, extending her hand. Marcus shook it firmly, his earlier nervousness melting away under her steady gaze. "Wouldn't have missed it," he replied. As they took their seats together, Evelyn leaned over slightly. "Just wait until you hear what's coming next," she teased cryptically, her eyes twinkling with mischief. When the ceremony began, the mayor stepped up to the microphone, welcoming everyone and expressing gratitude for the veterans' sacrifices. Then came the moment Marcus hadn't anticipated. Evelyn was invited to speak. She walked to the podium, adjusting the microphone to fit her height before addressing the crowd. Her voice carried strength and sincerity as she spoke about bravery, not just the kind displayed on battlefields, but the quiet resilience required to face life's challenges after service ended. "And today," she continued, turning toward Marcus, "we honor someone whose courage deserves recognition. Marcus Johnson has shown us all what true dignity looks like. Despite hardship, despite judgment, he carries himself with grace and humility. He reminds us that heroism isn't limited to moments of combat. It lives in how we treat others and how we rise above adversity." The crowd erupted into applause, many rising to their feet as Evelyn gestured for Marcus to join her on stage. At first, he hesitated, unsure whether he belonged in the spotlight, but Evelyn's encouraging nod gave him the push he needed. Using his wheelchair, he rolled onto the platform, where she presented him with a plaque commemorating his service and resilience. Tears welled in his eyes as he accepted it, overwhelmed by the outpouring of love and respect from the audience. Afterward, people lined up to shake Marcus's hand or share stories of loved ones who had served. For the first time in years, he felt truly seen, not as a disabled veteran defined by his struggles, but as a person whose contributions mattered deeply. That night, unable to sleep, Marcus reflected on how far he'd come since that fateful morning at the diner. What had begun as humiliation had transformed into healing, and now, purpose. Inspired by Evelyn's mentorship, Marcus threw himself into volunteering at the Veterans Center. He found joy in helping younger vets navigate their transition to civilian life, sharing advice while listening intently to their fears and frustrations. His own journey gave him credibility. His perseverance offered hope. "We've got this," he'd tell them during group sessions. "Together we can rebuild." Evelyn, meanwhile, became a beacon of advocacy both locally and beyond. Invited to speak at events across the state, she used her platform to highlight issues facing veterans and marginalized communities. Her message remained consistent. Standing in up for others isn't extraordinary, it's necessary. "Every act of kindness creates ripples," she often said, "and those ripples can turn into waves of change." As months turned into a year, the bond between Evelyn and Marcus only strengthened. They stayed in touch regularly, exchanging updates and occasionally meeting for coffee or breakfast at the diner, now a cherished tradition. Though neither sought fame or accolades, their actions inspired countless others to step forward, creating a culture of empathy and solidarity. Looking back, Marcus realized that the incident at the diner wasn't just about confronting bullies. It was about connection. It reminded him that no one is truly alone when there are people willing to stand beside them, and for Evelyn, it reinforced her belief in humanity's capacity for goodness, even in the face of cruelty. In the end, what started as a dark chapter in a quiet diner evolved into something beautiful, a testament to unity, compassion, and the enduring spirit of those who serve. Together, Evelyn and Marcus proved that acts of courage, no matter how small, have the power to spark meaningful change.